Chapter 687 Resounding Clash. I didn't want to come to this conclusion before, but as Adrian stood before the dragon generals as an accused traitor, surrounded by the entirety of the dragon camp, he found a small smile crawling up his face. There's definitely some mastermind pulling the strings here. It felt a little ironic, rather hilarious, even to Adrian. He was the one who usually took on such a role, so it was a little shocking to have someone else manipulate these events from the shadows. Whoever they are good. He smiled to himself. Not only were they able to catch him off guard, stripping him of the advantage he had built up from the start, but he was still unaware of this person's identity. All possible suspects weren't present, which meant this had to be a new foe. Unless. What's with that look? Do you not have words of defense to give? Arazak yelled out, his eyes bloodshot as steam proceeded from his nostrils. He seemed the most upset. Perhaps this was because he trusted Adrian the most, so he didn't expect this sort of outcome from their ultimate pawn. Whatever the reason was, the fury he felt nearly drove him mad. It doesn't matter what I say, does it? You've already concluded that I am the perpetrator. Adrian answered with composure, slowly acclimating to the surprising situation that he found himself in. I don't know what you saw, but what happened was simple. The enemies overwhelmed us. We tried to escape, but couldn't. Then, some invisible enemy attacked the commanders and killed them. After they all perished, the interference was lifted, and I was able to escape. As Adrian said those words, he too realized how off the series of events were. It all played out too conveniently. An invisible enemy, huh? You mean you attacked and killed them, don't you? Uriah growled as he deepened his glare. Adrian was forced to sigh again. This is why I didn't want to respond. It doesn't look like there's anything I can say to change their minds. He found it to be a shame, though. If the dragons could use their brains a little, they would realize that the whole narrative didn't make a lot of sense. Why would I kill the commanders in such an overt way when I am being watched and recorded by magic? Speaking of recording magic, that's probably how the mastermind was able to implicate me. He leaked out a wry grin, remembering a particular moment of the past. I suppose this is how you felt, Ray. Being surrounded and accused so surprisingly, despite having plans of your own. The only difference between Adrian and Ray was that the former was not in any way responsible for the death of the commanders, while the latter was. That means we can resort to using the truth seeker, right? Or perhaps that's what the mastermind wants. If the truth seeker has been tampered with, and it proves me guilty, then there's no coming back at all. That would definitely put him in an even worse off position. This whole affair still confuses me, though. Adrian felt everything slow down as he had these thoughts, slowly raising his head to look at the generals. The best way to explain the current situation is if the recordings were tampered with right as it was broadcasting the information to the generals, allowing them to see completely different information from what was actually happening. But that didn't make any sense to Adrian. My magic was coursing through that device and I was constantly observing it. There's no way anyone would have interfered with it and I wouldn't have felt a shift. He thought, tightly gritting his teeth. He already envisioned a similar situation like this happening, so he made sure to take all the precautions necessary. Yet, it seemed that wasn't enough. Is there something I'm missing? What exactly is it? I have to know. That's enough yapping. Cephas yelled out, causing everything around him to tremble like with an earthquake. His eyes were bulging wide, and his lips were stretched so they met both sides of his face. In all honesty, he seemed nothing short of an insane man. Well, a very young one, but still. Energy pulsated out of Cephas as he stepped forward. The very air vibrated, constantly buzzing as sparks and crackles of light danced off him. We already know he's guilty, and that he's dangerous. He killed 12 commanders, so the answer is clear. He's working for the elves and has backstabbed us. Perhaps this was his intention all along. In that case, Cephas crouched, almost as if getting ready to sprint. His position felt slightly animalistic, and his slithering ashen tail, coupled with the 4 horns that were evidently protruding out of his head, shot up as his eyes widened considerably. His eyes shone a bright white, and his hair took on that color instantly. We should execute him. Whoosh. In a blur that would be impossible for any normal eye to keep up with, he zoomed away from his position, causing the ground beneath him to shatter. Not even the dragon spectators could keep track of his movements. What they could only see was a blur, and the blur only had one destination. The traitor, Adrian. Ha 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 ha. Cackles of laughter echoed out as Cephas launched his claw towards Adrian, who blocked it with a blade that he manifested out of seemingly nowhere. The result. Boom. Immense destruction spread for a dozen meters or so, but everything that surrounded them for at least a couple kilometers shook in response to the impact. The clouds slowly began to shift as the air pressure was slowly changing. Don't worry, everyone. I'll execute him for us. Cephas licked his lips as he stared very intensely at Adrian, who kept up his calm facade. The other 2 generals sighed, shaking their heads as they witnessed their colleague go savage again. They already knew there was no stopping him at this point. Once the dragon general decided to have his fun, it was too late. He could still be useful, though. Isn't killing him a bit of a waste? Uriah mumbled, looking at Arazak with a bit of forlorn eyes. As much as he didn't trust Adrian, there was no denying his value. Surely, his comrades could see that and arrive at a compromise, perhaps enslaving the boy in some way. Don't overestimate him, Uriah. He is only a human in the end. Arazak's response was cold and detached, but his frown seemed to show something different. I would have granted his request, you know. The kid had so much promise. He just had to blow it. Yeah. The 2 generals chose to watch the fight from where they stood, ignoring the other soldiers who were already seeking shelter from the devastation that the clash was causing. Not many could withstand the debris and several lashes of energy that chaotically befell the camp. But, all of this was nothing. It was nothing more than a welcome greeting from the 2, especially Cephas. Get ready, Adrian. He licked his lips, clenching his other hand to form a fist as his claw scraped against Adrian's blade. We're going to have quite a ride. He wasn't interested in a swift execution or any kind of execution at all, despite declaring himself as the executioner. He just wanted to fight. Boom. The blow from Cephas resounded across the land, and it sent Adrian flying into the sky. You used a barrier, huh? Ha 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 ha. That's impressively fast. Cephas' laughter echoed as he ascended to the sky to keep up with Adrian. In no time at all, he was right in front of him, the both of them ascending together. I always knew you were strong. Stronger than you were letting on. He reached for Adrian's throat, but found the barrier that shielded the boy was still in effect. He. There's no need to be so shy. The childlike voice of the general felt like metal scraping metal, a disgusting display of the lust for battle. Strands of saliva floated out of his lips as he spoke. As his now white hair danced with the wind, he raised both hands, clasped them together, and then sent them crashing on Adrian's barrier. The result was a shattering effect. Boom! In an instant, the barrier broke apart, leaving Adrian defenseless as he began to descend to the ground as a result of the powerful impact that Cephas exerted. Before he could fall any lower, though. Where do you think you're going? Cephas grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him back up. The transition was smooth, and the moment Adrian was pulled up, a wave of energy crashed upon him that sent the boy falling back down. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Cephas laughed maniacally as he held Adrian tightly and thrust himself towards the darkened ground, aiming for the two of them to crash upon it together. We're going to be having loads of fun, Adrian. Let's enjoy ourselves a lot. Chapter 688 Adrian vs Cephas. Boom. The earth shattered apart, and everything around it was both a pile of molten rock, and a disorganized heap of debris. Standing amidst the sight of destruction was a single being. Ah! You used spatial magic to teleport before we hit the ground. Yeah. Forgot you had that. Cephas mumbled, slowly above the huge crater he created as a result of his crash. His gaze was fixed in one direction alone, and that was where Adrian floated, his hand tightly gripping the same blade from earlier. I can't fight you like a normal opponent, it seems. You're smart and strong. An annoying opponent, which makes you worth fighting. Oh. I can't wait till I completely crush you, and... Cephas, you're getting carried away. Uriah yelled out from the distance where he stood. Arazak was right beside him, and they both had unpleasant expressions to give him. We need to get this sorted out quickly so we know what to do about the conquest. They could attack our camp any minute now, so this isn't the time to be wasting any time. Yeah, got it? Cephas grinned, having a certain twinkle in his eyes. Whatever. Please just finish up quickly so we can prepare for our next course of action. Uriah's hands covered his face as he sighed in exasperation, so he couldn't see Cephas' look of disappointment after being chastised. This terrible mood of his didn't last long, though. Fine, he said with a brilliant grin, quickly returning to the optimistic vibe he had earlier. I'll end it quickly. He crouched once again, watching Adrian like a predator observes prey. The lad in the sky narrowed his eyes as he took his stance in the air, preparing himself for whatever attack that would be dished out. Here I come. Yush. Now much faster than before, Cephas caught up with Adrian within a fraction of a moment, his hand already tightly on his neck. As soon as this happened, Adrian vanished from his position, but not so fast. Zzzzzztzz. All of a sudden, as if reality had just become a glitch, everything about Adrian, and the area where he vanished from began to show signs of static. And then, Adrian returned to Cephas' grasp. What? Adrian's expression seemed to say in shock, but Cephas had already begun to squeeze his neck, so the expression was bound to transform into a suffocating one. Fortunately for the former, however, he had another skill to come in handy. A sudden surge of flame suddenly engulfed the two of them, completely baptizing them in searing heat. You can't escape with just this. A single burst of energy from him quelled the flames, sending it into oblivion. Unfortunately for him, the moment this happened, he realized that Adrian was no longer in his grip. Slippery bastard. Cephas mumbled, slowly letting down the outstretched hand. No matter. His escape doesn't matter anymore. His dragon senses showed him where Adrian had gone to, and it wasn't left or right. Above. Cephas turned his attention to the sky and found the lad to be charging at him with a shroud of lightning encasing his entire body. Whoosh! The brilliant flash of light resonated greatly with the surroundings, and it fueled Adrian's blade as it clashed on Cephas in no time. Normally, such a hit would deal a significant amount of injury on him. In fact, even the brilliant plumes of flames that he recently banished should have done the same. But Cephas didn't appear to be injured at all. In fact, he was grinning like a madman. He went ahead to hold Adrian's blade, instantly shattering it with his hardened hands, stretching his second hand towards his throat. Once again, Adrian tried to retreat. But bzzzztzz. He found himself in the same situation that he tried to escape. He was stuck in the same situation again, allowing Cephas to grab his throat. Before Adrian could even squirm out or move, the dragon general thrust his sharpened claws, and a considerable length of his arms into him. Squelch! Following that disgusting sound was the spraying of blood. Adrian's gaping stomach overflowed with the crimson liquid as Cephas led him up and let the blood gush out. We aren't done, of course. Never done. Once Cephas said this, Adrian's wounds were reversed. Almost as if he never had the injury, to begin with. The shocked look on Adrian's face showed that this was not even his doing. But what did that matter? Cephas targeted his neck next, breaking it in one simple breath. Normally, this would mean the death of the target, but this too was reversed in a single moment. He went on to dismember Adrian, but then the effects reversed. This process went on, causing bloodshed and a reset that never seemed to end. Again and again, all manner of punishments were dealt to Adrian, until finally, he was done. Cephas flung the helpless body of Adrian to the ground, causing the ground to shatter in the process. Ha 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 ha. This is so much fun. He stood on top of Adrian, his fist pummeling him, and then reversing it over and over again. But, not all were reversed. Slowly, the wounds began to build up, displaying scratches, bumps, and a bunch of other unsavory aspects on Adrian's bloodied face. Cephas, please just end it already. We really need to. Shut it. Cephas yelled out, shutting down Uriah, as well as anyone else who would desire to challenge him. Despite being colleagues, Uriah was forced to follow the command of Cephas and keep quiet. The reason was due to a difference in strength. And no, it wasn't just brute strength. It was a power that only Cephas and one other dragon had, the kind that made one invincible. No one wanted to suffer under its hands the kind of suffering that Adrian was no doubt experiencing at the moment. The ability to slow down, reverse, or increase the flow of time on a specified target. That was Cephas' trump card. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. What are your thoughts on this? I'm pretty curious, actually. Chapter 689, How the Fight Ended. The strongest. It means different things to different people. Some attribute only physical characteristics to it, while others consider the mental or supernatural attributes to the term. However, everyone shares one common assumption when addressing the matter. To be the strongest means to be the best. And Cephas could be considered the strongest of the second squad. Not only were his stats absurdly high, at least compared to the other generals, but his skills had a much higher level of mastery. His level was higher too, making him an all-round superior entity when compared to almost every other general. But, that wasn't the only reason he was feared and revered as the strongest. The main reason was due to his skill. Tier S ability allows the user to control the flow of time experienced by a specified target. The target's time can be slowed, reversed, or advanced. With this skill, CEFOS could advance his own time, making him much faster than normal. He could also slow down the time of his targets by only touching them once. The most dangerous aspect of it was the reversal aspect, that allowed him to reverse the state of his target including their positions or well-being. Using this power, even if he fell under a fatal attack, it would be as if he never sustained any injury. As long as this power existed, and he had it activated, CEFOS was unstoppable by those within his rank or lower. He was an absolute monster. It's over, CEFOS. You win. The two dragon generals stood beside the dragon general. He was kneeling atop the bloodied corpse of Adrian Chase. There was only so much a corpse could take before turning all mangled and gross, unrecognizable from its previous state. CEFOS had dealt such intense and immense damage on the body that it had become nothing but a mesh of ground bones and pasty flesh. The ground had suffered considerable damage. The whole area around him had sunk to the ground, making it an expansive crater with blood designing its walls. CEFOS, after hearing the words of his colleagues, and feeling their hands on his shoulders, finally stopped pounding the boy's dead flesh and exhaled deeply. Hue. For a moment, dreary silence filled the crater. The generals were still as they waited for him. He used his skill to remove all the blood from his body, making him squeaky clean. His ashen outfit also returned to him, and in no time at all, he was back to normal. He looked nothing more than a sweet kid with horns, wings, and a tail. Some speculations were already floating around that he constantly used his to keep himself forever young, and that he was much older than he seemed. While others claimed he was actually still a child considering his personality. Whatever the case was, the two generals behind him didn't care one bit. As long as he was not a threat to them, and he could handle their enemies with the same fervor, they were always going to be on his side. How long was it this time? He asked, rising from the gore beneath him. Arazak and Uriah looked at each other for a few seconds, each wondering if the other would do the honors of saying it. After those moments of uncomfortable silence, Arazak finally took on the mantle of speech. 5 hours. It's not bad, considering your past record. Ahem, I mean. Yeah. I see. CEFOS muttered, returning his gaze to the bloody mess he had turned Adrian into. His white hair darkened and his eyes stopped glowing, leaving a dead look in his eyes as he leaked out a sigh. I thought he'd make me last longer. I suppose he wasn't as strong as I was hoping. Yeah. Sorry about that. The faint melancholic mood was soon discarded the moment CEFOS smiled and returned to his cheerful mood. I suppose that's good news for you. I didn't take up too much of your time, so we can commence the meeting. The moment he smiled, the other two generals did the same. Albeit a little more awkwardly. Yeah. We were even considering starting without you. What? Are you for real? Yep. That's what you get for not ending it quickly. But I can't help it. Yeah. The dragons ascended from the crater, laughing cheerfully as if nothing had happened. As soon as they did so, they found all the dragons of the camp already gathered around. They totaled a couple thousand, not a particularly impressive number, considering what the elves had just displayed. Still, the fact that they all belonged to the proud dragon race was enough of an assurance for the generals, who were now slowly walking to the tent. We should get this over with already. The sooner we crush the elves the better. Indeed. The rest are already waiting for us. We can't keep them waiting, can we? The generals entered the tent and found their 12 commanders occupying their positions in their respective seats. The moment the commanders noticed the entry of the generals, they all rose to their feet, bowing in respect. As usual, the generals responded by slightly raising their hands, and the 12 returned to their seats. Everyone was in a serious mood, as expected of such an important meeting. Even the man at the foot of the table. Apologies for the delay. We had to handle a rather suspicious traitor, as you all know. Hope you don't mind the wait, Adrian. All eyes fell on the human who sat comfortably and watched the dragons with a calm smile on his face. Not at all. Who would have expected that a dragon would betray the camp in favor of the elves? You were right to punish him. All 12 commanders nodded, and the generals followed suit, satisfied with Adrian's answer. Right. In any case, we should commence the meeting. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. Is anyone confused? Well, that is indeed the goal. Chapter 690 Fulfilled Wish. Damn it. Adrian raised his voice in frustration as he returned to his tent, anger clearly visible on his face. His clenched fists sought a place to release all the tension coursing through them, but he controlled himself despite the overwhelming sensation that coursed through him. He couldn't afford to go rabid after everything that had just transpired. HAAA. Closing his eyes, he inhaled and exhaled multiple times until the fiery frustration in his heart receded. Once he was satisfied, he went to his seat and calmed himself once more. We just finished the meeting regarding the problem of the elves and how they were able to destroy the second wave. Looks like everyone is on edge. The generals were particularly upset by the outcome that had befallen Adrian and the commanders. How could they have lost? It brought shame to the dragons. Adrian could remember a lot of things that the generals said, and while a lot of it was frustrating to even remember, this outcome was much more preferable to what would have been if he left things as they were. To think I had to use so early. Damn it. The more he thought about it, the more he understood how necessary it was for him to resort to it, but that didn't make him the least bit happier about the outcome. How could I have been pushed to such an extent? I didn't even use the skill on my own terms, but in a scenario orchestrated by another. Were they after this all along? He could feel his anger rising, but he controlled himself once again. Taking in another series of breaths, he found his head clear. Is a one-time skill. I spent so much of my stat points to obtain it, and it was never supposed to be used until I got to the Dragon Continent. But now, to say he was frustrated would be an understatement. One of his most important skills had now become exhausted. The worst part about it was that he couldn't get anything like it again. That's the limitation of. Adrian thought back to when he first laid eyes on the skill. Back then, he thought it would be the most versatile thing ever, and in a way, he was correct. With skill creation, he could create whatever skill he wanted, especially if he had sufficient incentive for it, generally status points or other skills. As long as he sacrificed a portion of his strength to the skill, he could make any kind of skill. Each tier had its requirements, and he couldn't make any SSS tier skill. All in all, it remained a fair bargain. But, I wasn't aware of this limitation until after I obtained the skill. I can't create a skill that I have already created. No two skills of his could have the same effect or name, so once he made a skill one-time use or not, he could not make a skill with the same kind of effects. Even if he wanted to make a variant, the functions of both skills couldn't be too similar, else the creation process would fail. That was the most vexing part about, and why he was so annoyed that he was pushed into using such a useful skill like. Well, there's no helping it, is there? He thought loudly as he chuckled. Adrian had been played, and played good for that matter. It was a new experience, and it left him confused about how to respond to the situation. For my plans, I have to make sure the dragons keep me on their side. I have to get to the dragon continent through legitimate means and seep into their empire. All of it has to be organic, which is why I'm enduring all of this. As regretful as he was about the events that transpired not too long ago, and how he had to respond to it, he was glad about the results. The status quo has returned to the way it was, and the present reality has overwritten the past, at least, in their minds. Adrian did not have nearly enough resources to actually affect reality, so the most he could do was make everyone think in a new way. Is already at its limit, since I've created 12 puppets to replace the commanders, but at least the generals are back on my side. Still, this was only a treatment, not a cure. Adrian recognized that much. I'm nowhere close to finding the mastermind behind all of this. The one supporting the elves? The one who actually played me. It was frustrating, but Adrian didn't know who the person was. And then, there's the other thing bothering me. Adrian looked at the glowing object on his table that had the form of an orb. It warbled constantly, but the light it displayed was dim. Why isn't Justin picking up? I've been calling him all this time, yet he isn't responding. Such a thing hadn't happened before, and would normally never occur, which made Adrian suspect that something was going down in the capital. It's unfortunate, but I can't leave for the capital due to my plans here, and how the current situation has worsened more than ever. If he allowed himself to be distracted at this point, there was a good chance he would lose the war on all ends. I can't allow that to happen. With unavailable for use, Adrian's best bet had to be using his backup undead to investigate what was going on there and report to him after a specified period. While that is happening, I have to really understand this mastermind that's messing with me, as well as what they want. So far, Adrian only had one person he suspected. As he was still going through everything, every time only arriving at the same person, the door to his tent opened up and someone walked in. Hey, man. Adrian raised his head the moment he heard the voice, his eyes wide as the name on his mind overlapped with the figure he saw in front of him. Long time no see. Asterisk. 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 Thanks for reading. This was quite the trip, wasn't it? I hope you all enjoyed the chapter. Chapter 691 Conversation between extras. Adrian's eyes were nearly bulging. He did his best to hide his surprise, but it was impossible to fully keep it all tucked away. Having such a bombardment of information had taken its toll on him, so adding one more surprise to his list was the last straw. He could only gawk as the very person he suspected walked into the tent in a casual stride. Long time no see, he said, causing Adrian to tense up a little. Before Adrian could think of much to say, his lips slowly parted and words flowed out like a smooth river. Yeah. It's been a while, Ray. Indeed, it had been quite some time since they saw each other. Yes, he and Ray interacted just a while back, but that was through a puppet he made through. In actuality, they hadn't seen each other since the desertion of the Otherworlders. In a sense, Ray was correct. But, the fact that he was standing in front of him right now, despite the commotion and conditions surrounding the current situation, Adrian had a feeling Ray meant it in a more sarcastic sense. If that was the case, then he instantly felt foolish about even responding. It's difficult to believe, but you're the only one I know who fulfills all of the conditions necessary to push me this far. I suspected it was you for a while, but it seems my reliance on Justin's information proved to be my weak link. Adrian had long made Justin his loyal minion, so the boy could not lie to him, even if he tried. All the information prior to this point was also incredibly accurate, so there was never any suspicion that he would be lying. It made no sense whatsoever. And yet, here we are. He ensured not to glare at Ray, showing a calm facade instead as his mind went into swift overdrive. He had to manage the situation, and quickly. Relax, Adrian. Ray's voice echoed within the room as he took another step forward, oozing nothing short of an air of confidence. The Ray before him was nothing like the one he remembered. It wasn't just the eye patch covering his eyes, or the new attire he donned, or even the much more attractive body he somewhat developed after waking from his coma, if that was ever real. To begin with, all of those things added to the change, but Adrian suspected there was something else about Ray that oozed out, making him constantly uneasy. Something beyond his own abilities. I just want to talk. He took a seat and settled right in front of Adrian, the wave of unease only getting stronger the closer he got. Despite all of this, Adrian remained composed. He shifted on his chair, interlocking his fingers and giving the best smile he could muster. Sure, Ray. Let's talk. I never thought I would have you by the ropes like this. As Ray sat opposite Adrian, he could sense the boy's nervousness, or hesitance, perhaps both. Perhaps this was some sort of predatory instinct, or a manifestation of his elevated senses, but he could tell everything about his mood due to the changes in his facial reactions, subtle movements, as well as a bunch of other details. After seeing all of this, he couldn't help but feel some measure of catharsis. So he's not always a composed jackass. That's good to see. He grinned internally, even when realizing how petty he was being. Ray already knew the probable reason why Adrian was so shaken. He had most likely deduced that Ray was the mastermind upon his entry, and the shock was something that he was yet to fully get over from. He must have millions of questions in his mind. He must have a lot going on in his head right now. Ray knew all of that because the same would apply to him if he was in Adrian's position. I wonder how much he has figured out already. About everything. From the moment Adrian began to lead his army towards the elves, Ray had begun playing his game. Once I confirmed that Adrian left the dragon camp, I sent Emile there to disguise herself as a dragon and infiltrate the camp, which she did. Then, I had her use an illusion skill that she gets whenever she turns into Ader to fool the generals, who in turn turned the entire camp against Adrian. Of course, Ray maintained constant contact with Emile through it all, and he would have had her return to the elven camp, where he was based, if things got too dangerous. If she couldn't return, or if their communication disconnected for whatever reason, he was determined to go to the camp himself to save her, though, based on what he already observed. He doubted that would ever be the case. I could have used Adrian's absence to destroy the dragon army once and for all, but based on what Ader said, I had to understand Adrian's motives. So it was a much smarter move to make them turn on him so I could see how his reaction would be. Depending on the outcome, Ray reckoned he would be able to estimate the importance of his goals. If he chose to destroy the dragons after they turned against him, I was going to step in and confront him, killing them all myself in the process. There was no way he would leave free EXP alone. And, well, the outcome of everything was a little surprising, though still within expectation. Whatever benefit Adrian was going to get from the dragons had to be worth a lot, considering all that went down with the dragons and how Adrian reacted to it. I also did this to push Adrian to reveal his hidden cards and abilities. I knew he wouldn't show all of them, but I had to know his level of combat expertise since I haven't seen him fight before. Ray was disappointed on that front, since Adrian hardly put up a struggle, but after witnessing how Adrian responded to the whole thing, including the power he displayed to resolve everything, Ray was convinced. Chapter 692 Conversation between Extras. I already knew this for a while, but, this guy. He's an absolute monster. Name, Adrian Chase. Race human. Class necromancer. Level 90, life force, 30. Mana level, 100. Combat ability, 50. Stat points, 445. Skills. Skills. See more. Alignment chaotic neutral. A true mastermind. One who lurks in the shadows and causes others to do his bidding while laughing underneath his mask. His goals remain a mystery too. Ray wasn't surprised by Adrian's status window, since he had already seen it not too long ago. Still, no matter how many times he saw it, he couldn't help but be impressed and slightly intimidated by the sheer volume and utility of the skills at his disposal. He has even more skills than I do at the moment. Ray thought to himself. Yes, his own skills gotten through had an advantage of quality, therefore making Adrian's skills inferior. Despite that, Ray couldn't help but remain very careful with Adrian, at least, until he finally went through the details of each skill. They were all very useful, incredibly dangerous, and downright impeccable choices. However, none of them were of any real threat to Ray. Adrian's level was lower than his, and while he had more skills, Ray's were far more potent. Finally, when it came to levels and stats, Ray had a big lead. In essence, while caution was still a good thing to take notice of, there was truly no need to feel intimidated. The moment Ray recognized this, he became a lot more comfortable. Hiding in the shadows was fun while it lasted, but he would have figured out my identity sooner or later. Revealing myself now was the most optimal answer. Not only would he take Ader's advice by talking to Adrian, but he could also have the advantage of agency, making a lasting impression of dominance on the boy. So far, so good. I see. The fact that you're here means you know about Justin, as well as the situation surrounding our relationship. Ray cocked his head slightly. Don't feign ignorance. How else would you have been able to trick me for so long? You reckoned I wouldn't suspect you for all of this if you made Justin tell me that you were still in the capital. And, the only reason I would believe his words is because I have such a strong assurance that he would never betray me. Even if he wanted to. Ray neither denied nor accepted these allegations, he just kept up his blank facade. If you know about Justin, it's very likely that you had someone pretend to be him, using them to communicate with me, while Justin was probably communicating with you or them. There are other potential answers, but this seems most plausible. This guy. Ray smiled internally. He's too sharp. There was only one mistake in his assessment, and that was attributing all of this to be Ray's grand design. In actuality, Ader was the one who planned for this outcome, and the more it unfolded, the more Ray could see why he took certain steps. Still, I'm not about to correct his mistakes. He let Adrian keep talking, exposing even more threads that Ray had supposedly set up. If I'm to guess, the current state of the capital has something to do with you, huh? What current state? Did I overthink things, then? I suppose not being able to contact Justin coinciding with you revealing yourself could be part of a big reveal. If that's the case, then congratulations. You successfully startled me. Ray didn't want to take credit for most of these, some of which he wasn't even aware of the details, but he simply smiled and shrugged. Consider it a kind of revenge for the past. Haha. I deserve that, I guess. You're not a man to forget grudges, are you? Even after I made us even during the Dark Gathering. You still have a vendetta against me. Ray said nothing and kept staring at Adrian. I mean, even going as far as recreating the whole accusation thing with the dragons. Just due to the ploy I made back when we were all in the royal estate. I explained myself and called a truce, but you still refuse to budge. You haven't given me sufficient reason to. Ray. Ha. Look, I'm not your enemy. There's no reason for us to even be fighting. I've made it clear that I do not want to cross you in any way, so it's a little frustrating when you step on my goodwill and do stuff like this. Your goodwill. Okay. Maybe I phrased it a little wrong. Adrian sighed, slowly closing his eyes and inhaling deeply so he could calm himself. What I mean is, I haven't really interfered in your business until now, right? I've intentionally stayed away from you, and I have my own thing going. As for my actions in the past, I already gave you information and resources proportional to whatever I put you through. So, we are even, Ray. Perhaps Adrian was correct. After all, up until now, there really wasn't any objective reason for them to be on opposite sides. But things are different now. Ray said, straightening his posture on his seat. What do you mean by that? You're on the side of the dragons, Adrian. You've joined them in their conquest and you're slaughtering elves? Shifting closer now, Ray made sure his piercing gaze reached Adrian. After a moment of silence, he spoke. I want to know why. Chapter 693 Conversation between extras. Adrian was silent for a minute or so. During that period, he had a very important decision to make, whether or not to tell Ray about whatever he had going on with the dragons. Whichever option he chose had its own share of consequences, and it was up to him to decide what path to take regarding his reply. One thing was certain, though. Silence wasn't an option. To go home. Upon hearing Adrian's words, Ray's intense gaze flickered for a moment. His eyes softened considerably, though it resumed its hardened position in no time at all. Home. Yes. Adrian sighed, rubbing his face with his palm. Hidden within the Dragon Empire is a way for us to return to Earth. A way for me to go home. Ray couldn't believe his ears. He wanted to say Adrian was lying, but something within him told him that this was an unfiltered truth. As such, even though he parted his lips to speak, words refused to come out. He just stared. I need to gain their trust so that I can organically make it into the Dragon Empire. I have even been promised an introduction to a lord. Once that happens, I'll be one step closer to the place, the Chamber of Ancients. Chamber of Ancients. Ray had never heard those words before, but somehow, they sounded familiar. Hold on. I think I once heard Adonis mutter something like that when I caught him training by himself one time. He didn't think much of it then, and even now he wasn't even sure that was what he heard. Still, the name sounded oddly important. All of this could be a ruse, though. I don't think he's lying, and considering I can tell for the most part if that's the case, it'll be more illogical not to believe him. Besides, given what Ader told him, Ray didn't want to be too skeptical or antagonistic towards Adrian. He already promised his familiar that he would listen to what Adrian had to say with a clear head. Let's try not to be too biased, he told himself calmly as he continued taking in the information he received. From what I know about it, the place is a dome-like structure that rests at a very problematic place in the Dragon Empire. I don't see myself surviving an attempt there if I don't have legitimate grounds to be as close to the place as possible. It has. What problematic place? The Empire's capital. That's where it is situated. Ah. Go on. Ray found himself slightly flustered once he heard that, not that it showed on him in the slightest. Chances are that the strongest forces that the dragons have will be situated there. If I count the Dragon Emperor, it would be unwise to just challenge him by going to his turf. That brief encounter with the Oracle had shown him just how far he needed to go if he wanted to take on the Emperor with absolute confidence for victory. At the moment, he didn't have that. The Chamber of Ancients has the same kind of magic, or should I say a similar kind of magic as the one that brought us here. Space-time magic, and it's an ancient one. Same as the one that Luciel and the other mages utilized. No one really knew about ancient magic, or how they came to exist, but every now and then they popped up. The interdimensional summoning that brought Ray and his friends to H-Tray was classified as such, as it was a rune inscribed within ancient scrolls that were later transcribed by the Grand Mage to be useful for summoning otherworlders. It took Luciel several years to decipher the magic and instructions given in the scrolls, and within other old texts, which was how they were able to successfully summon everyone. It was also why they knew they couldn't perform another summoning until decades had passed. All of this was written down and solved by the Grand Mage Luciel. The Chamber of Ancients hasn't been used in very long, not for hundreds of years, by my closest estimates. We should be able to engineer it in a way for us otherworlders to find a way home. Adrian explained, a brilliant smile written on his face. Ray remained silent for a few moments, trying his best to digest the influx of emotions he had to manage. Some thoughts flashed in his head, but he suppressed them almost instantly. His primary focus was this conversation, so he set aside everything else and decided to concentrate on it. A way home, he mumbled. Is that why you killed so many elves? The moment Ray said this, Adrian groaned and rolled his eyes, almost as if he couldn't believe he was being lectured about the ongoing genocide. This is my problem with you, Ray. You're smart and strong, yet you always hesitate to make sacrifices for the greater good. To see the bigger picture. What bigger picture? I don't claim to be a saint, but the elves are people, Adrian. You're killing thousands upon thousands of people so you can go home. Same way you'd kill thousands and thousands of monsters to get stronger, Ray. They're not the same. How so? Adrian shifted forward as he furrowed his brow. I can understand your hesitance to kill humans, Ray. I get it. But elves? What makes them so different from the monsters you have slaughtered mercilessly? What are you saying? Ray appeared appalled by Adrian's way of thinking. Didn't it go without saying why the elves were different from monsters? Is it because they appear humanoid? There are monsters who have a lot of human features, yet you'd kill them with no hesitation. The elves are even hostile towards other races, same as monsters. That doesn't make them the SA. How much do you even know about monsters? You realize some of them have intelligence on par with humans, right? Certain goblins, despite being primitive, have displayed the intelligence of children. Some lizardmen even build huts and simple tools, similar to how we used to during the Stone Ages on Earth. The list goes on, Ray. Given enough time, with evolution and further learning, they could become a very intelligent species. Yet, you'd kill those monsters without hesitation, wouldn't you? I would. They're ultimately a threat too. And the elves aren't a threat? Right now, their deity tells them to kill the dragons and they obey. What if we're next? What then? I'd kill them then. Then apply that logic to monsters. Certain monsters, intelligent creatures, live out the rest of their lives without bothering anyone. Yes, they are aggressive towards people, but they won't go out of their way to bother us if we just leave them alone. Ray got flashes of his time in the royal dungeon, the moments he spent mindlessly killing so many of the monsters there that he lost count of the number. He didn't think much of it then, and even now. But Adrian's words kept digging deep into his mind and began seeping right inside his thoughts. Why didn't you spare them? Why didn't you leave them alone since they weren't threats? Ray already knew the answer to that, and it was in parallel to the answer Adrian would also give for his own massacre of the elves. To achieve my goals, I would do anything, Adrian said, his eyes flashing with incredible determination. Ray felt his heart tighten as their eyes connected, reflecting something similar.